It doesn't matter if you're packing drugs inside of breast implants, statues, or various other orifices. It's just a bad idea. Today we're going to cover a bunch of those.
Hello and welcome to Bad Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and today's episode is brought to you by our featured patron this week, Jay Show. Thanks, Jay. Tony's got the bad idea for us this week. Tony, what are we hearing about today?
Today we're going to be talking about bad ideas as far as drug smuggling. Which, drug smuggling is generally a bad idea, but there are some very, very bad ways of doing it as opposed to just the general ways they usually get it done.
Is this going to be us giving advice to drug smugglers about, listen, if you're gonna smuggle drugs, not this way?
Some of it's going to be that, and some of it's also going to be stuff that just had me laughing. So,
Okay.
we'll see which ones come up more.
We're not allowed to laugh in this show, Tony. It's very serious.
No, it's very serious. According to data from the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime and the European crime-fighting agency Europol, the annual global drugs trade is worth about $435 billion. When you've got opportunities for cash that equal the GDP of many countries combined, there are people who are willing to go to extreme lengths to cash in. Today we're going to talk about some of the most absurd ways people have been caught smuggling drugs.
All right. What do you got?
The very first one is from Thailand. It's one of those, basically a simple bait and switch type thing. You try to make something that's innocuous but maybe a little bit gross so people are going to inspect it. They came up with gay lube oil.
What?
In an effort to make people think, oh, it's so icky and I'm not going to inspect it, Thai drug dealers tried to ship 150 vials of testosterone in bottles labeled gay lube oil. It was a very, very sparkly label.
So, I guess this must exist, right? Like, I don't know anything about gay stuff, really, but I know about marketing, and I know that people have products that are lube, and it's like the Schick razor that's exactly the same, but one of them is pink, and they market it to ladies, and the other one's blue, and they market it to dudes, and it's the same razor, but, you know, you have, like, totally different marketing campaigns. So there's probably the same thing for lube, right?
I would assume so. I've been to sex shops, but I don't necessarily remember seeing gendered lubricants.
You're missing
I'm sure
an opportunity.
They're out there. Yeah. Maybe that's our calling. We're just going to make, like, for him and for her. For him and him and for her and for her
out.
And like all the combinations therein. This was right before the 2008 Olympics in Australia, and the Australian officials were saying that they actually had been getting huge amounts of confiscated steroids right before the Olympics, which makes me think some of Australia's medals are suspect.
I thought you were going to say they've been getting huge amounts of gay lube, Tony.
I mean, that might happen at the Olympics. We don't know.
I've heard they're very raunchy in the athletes' village.
The investigators actually said that most people being suspected aren't athletes, but people trying to look better and maintain better erections. So, it might not just be the Olympic teams.
Fair enough.
This next one is actually moderately clever. Like, it's the cocaine Christ.
Okay.
On the border between Texas and Mexico, smugglers were found to have taken statues of Christ made entirely out of cocaine. The cocaine was made with a paste and then molded. After that, it was painted. It looked like a legit plaster statue, something you'd see at any shop selling Catholic decor. It's believed that this technique is actually used pretty often with great success, and you're getting literal pounds of cocaine over, so each one of these statues is worth upwards of $20,000 to $100,000, depending on the size.
I assume they found them out through drug-sniffing dogs? That's what I would go for.
Yeah, that's how they ended up finding this one out. Like I said, some of these are better ideas than others. It's just, like, the one that I saw was such an immaculate, like, statue that it looked perfect, and that one's probably the better idea.
Do you have on this list, I don't want to jump ahead, do you have on this list the smugglers that made all of the fittings on their boat out of cocaine?
No, I thought about doing that, as well as the smugglers that made all of the pallets that they were shipping completely out of cocaine. So the pallets themselves were just like pressed cocaine into like a wood type structure with other stuff on it.
Were they shipping like regular stuff like Campbell's soup and then trying to Okay.
They were shipping like fruit and all sorts of other things, but the pallets themselves were made out of cocaine.
Man, human ingenuity.
Yeah. I mean, you look at it now and they've got entire submarine like networks just to handle getting cocaine to Miami. It's
Yeah,
pretty
if it
insane.
works, it doesn't really count as a bad idea, though.
No,
So,
like these are more people that got caught doing just dumb things. This next one is a New York man that was busted trying to get ketamine into the USA from Canada, claiming that he just wanted to get his religious artifacts home. A
what
drug
is
sniffing
ketamine?
ketamine is a drug there's a lot of different uses for it. It's kind of like it's something that will mellow people out. Sometimes in high doses, it's used as the date rape drug. And a lot of psychologists are finding that it has some very, very good uses in certain types of sessions in conjunction with other drugs to help with PTSD and various other things. But as far as a party drug, it's something that will mellow you out to the point of basically not existing. They call it being in a K-hole whenever you're just like out of it.
Okay.
But this man bought 42 bottles of quote-unquote holy water and tried to bring it across the border.
Okay.
So just imagine bottles with stickers that just say holy water, and it's just filled to the brim with ketamine.
I mean, let's be real here, Tony. It's not like one person in the world has the lock on being able to produce holy water. If you've
That's
got
true.
a priest and you've got a big vat of water, like, it's not like a Nabisco product. There's not going to be like a standardized labeling system from the Catholic Church, I don't think. So I'm not that surprised that maybe actual holy water does come in just like a regular bottle labeled holy water. But
The only
I guess
holy
not this
water
time.
bottles I've seen that a friend of mine has is built into a cross on his wall that's part of a vampire slaying kit. Like Jesus slides off of there and it reveals a bunch of things that you can kill vampires with.
That is not a bad idea, Tony. We can't talk about that. I'm sorry.
All right, the next one is a little bit of a desperate attempt from a Saudi smuggler. This guy was basically in his robes and thought, well, I could make some good money doing this. So he decided he was going to strap 14 bottles, full-size bottles of liquor, using tape to his body and just put a robe over it. Like nobody would notice that he was sloshing around.
Like everybody would be cool with the Arabic-looking guy with obviously some kind of device taped to his body.
Yes, exactly.
Not to be racist, but maybe I'm being a little racist here, Tony.
Oh, it's profiling, but it's also whenever you see somebody with a bunch of suspicious things under their robe walking funny, it's definitely going to get some people's attention. But imagine that this guy just taped 14 bottles to him, like 3 around each ankle, and then a bunch like on his butt, so that whenever he's sitting, he's actually sitting on top of these bottles for multiple hours on a flight. It's just not a good idea.
Yeah, that last part really just, it's not worth it. It's not worth it, man. I don't know what they're paying you, but it's not enough. It's barely enough to get on an airplane at all these days.
Yeah. Well, in Saudi Arabia, there actually are some pretty high numbers on the black market. In America, a bottle of Johnny Walker costs about $40 to $50. In Saudi Arabia, that same bottle will sell for about $800. So if you had a decent way of doing this, you could make some good cash. This has actually made a sort of bootleggers market in Saudi Arabia. One of the interesting stories I stumbled upon here is that the bootleggers were actually storing the alcohol that they were making at the Grand Mufti's home. The Grand Mufti is one of their highest like clerics or religious figures, but because he was blind, they figured they could get away with it because he wouldn't know it was in the boxes anyway. So like they were just using this because they knew nobody was going to search that house for anything illegal because he had so much power. But there's a lot of weird bootlegging that's going on out there right now.
Yeah, one day we might have to do a bad idea on the war on drugs, Tony.
Yeah, or even just one on prohibition because that was very clearly a bad idea. Also in Saudi Arabia, they were having some issues where people were basically bringing in cases of Pepsi that were just Heineken bottles or Heineken with a sticker over it that made it look like Pepsi. And it really wasn't that hard to tell what it was, but there was someone who got caught bringing in 48,000 cans of it. And in Saudi Arabia, having any alcohol is enough to send you to prison for several years, as well as receive a public flogging. I could not find what happened to the guy that brought 48,000 cans in.
What's up next, Tony?
The next one is probably the worst idea on this entire list. There might be one more, but this is a Colombian woman who was caught trying to get into Frankfurt carrying a full kilo of cocaine in her breasts. This brutally painful procedure was found out by airport officials because during the strip search they noticed the untreated and unsewn wounds on her chest. Essentially,
Oh,
she had flown from Colombia to Germany with open wounds and 500-gram bags of cocaine in each breast.
when you said in her breasts, Tony, I thought you just meant like by her breasts. You know,
No.
because women will just sort of store stuff down there.
Yeah, it's like I know a lot of girls that have like a $20 bill, a cell phone, whatever. Like bras are good for that.
But no, you meant inside her body,
Yes, they
inside
were
the
body
skin parts
packing.
of her,
Yes.
underneath.
And this isn't the only time that a woman's been caught doing this either. There was a woman in Spain that got caught with 4 pounds of cocaine in her chest. She was caught because she was bleeding for the entire flight. So these are just open wounds, like filled and packed with cocaine.
So what you're saying is there's an opportunity for some enterprising doctor out there to actually do this right.
I would assume that there would be at least somebody who could sew somebody up, because it sounds like it was literally just cartel people cutting somebody open and shoving it in there.
Yeah.
Usually,
Yeah, there's a whole extra element, and I know you probably don't know this, but there's a possibility these people weren't on board with this 100%.
and I couldn't get that information because they didn't actually talk much about the women that were doing this. I know that both of them in these instances had families that I felt might have been threatened, but it also might have been a chance to make a whole lot of money in a situation where it would go a very long way in Colombia. So I could see it going either way there. I don't think that this would have been their first choice on it, especially considering most drugs are just smuggled rectally.
Yeah, it also doesn't seem like you'd be able to get that much in there. What drug is valuable enough where that's a good solution?
Well, the New York Post said that the drugs that she smuggled were worth about $200,000, but I feel like that's hyperinflated. It's like how cops are like, we busted a thing for $48 million worth of weed, and it's like, man, weed is kind of cheap. Like, I think that in America, that same amount would go between 20 and 28,000. So it's still a hefty chunk of change, but is it hefty enough to have your body cut open?
No, it's not. I'm going to answer that definitively.
It's just brutal looking at like the way they packed these, because these are just like sloppily packed. They said that one of them was actually leaking a little bit, which was causing some hypertension and basically just getting them like like just straight up cocaine into their bloodstream. The next one is similar, but not quite as graphic. A Costa Rican man strapped a half-pound of cocaine to his member and was immediately foiled when Spanish security grabbed it and got a little bit more than they bargained for during a routine search. Maybe next time, try to make it seem more average than walking around in gym shorts and having a tennis tube right on your crotch.
Like, is that literally what he did?
The picture I saw made it look like it was about the size of like a tennis tube, like tennis ball tube. So I think that if he would have just gone a little bit more modest, he probably could have gotten away with it.
People are always shoving things down their pants, man. That's like 50% of the dumb crook stories that you hear is like somebody shoved a lobster down his pants. Stop shoving lobsters down your pants, guys. Bad idea.
The next one is one that could actually fit with the whole Trump agenda. This is somebody driving over the top of a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. But they made a ramp that basically stopped at a complete peak at the top of the 14-foot wall without a whole lot on the other side, so the car just got high-centered and is stuck there. So you've got a Jeep Cherokee stuck at the 14-foot point of a wall. Luckily enough for these guys, they were able to get away and just abandon the car. But it's just like you got to get a little bit of steam going over the top, otherwise you are going to high center that thing.
I can imagine that they had intended to jump, and they got about halfway up the ramp, and somebody was like, yeah, but I don't know. And by then it was too late to stop.
The ramps were exactly as wide as the tires, so there really wasn't a whole lot of leeway room. Like that would have been very, very intense to try to get over that. The next one is one of the darker ones on this list, and that is that the Colombian drug cartels, on a regular basis, have cut open dogs, stuffed multiple pounds of cocaine in them, and brought them over the border. Like, it's straight up a heinous act where they are taking puppies, where they're taking dogs, and they just fill their entire chest cavity with as much drugs as possible, sometimes up to 10 pounds.
Interestingly enough, this is not the first time we've had dog smuggling on the show, although not quite in such a gruesome fashion. Do you remember when we talked about the gabelle? One of the
Yeah, I do remember that.
methods of smuggling the salt was to have a dog in your house that only you treated well and everybody else treated him like crap, and then you would take him somewhere away, put salt on him, and then he would run the salt back to your house. They didn't cut the dogs open at the time, though. So even...
Yeah, surgical practices back in those days were much worse. But why is it always about white powder?
I don't know. Salt isn't really a powder, but I take your point.
That's true. It's a crystal, but similar. But this is all part of, like, body packing. Body packing is the technical term for what we've been talking about for ingested, surgically inserted, or rectally packed drugs. Other than the extreme discomfort this must cause when flying from Colombia to Europe or any other places, there's also a danger. Not all of the packages stay contained. There have been hundreds of cases where people have actually had one of these packages that they've swallowed filled with heroin or cocaine rupture, and a lot of them have straight up died of an overdose from having this, because if you put a bunch of heroin inside your rectum and it breaks, it will straight up leak or be absorbed into your body, and that is a huge dose for your body to deal with.
Man, I'm glad that my life has not brought me to the point where I would be smuggling drugs for anybody up my butt. That's just something to be thankful for today.
Yes, very much so. We've never had to use that prison pocket.
Okay, Tony. Let's keep it clean. It's a clean podcast. We're on the edge for a lot of the stuff in this one.
I'm going to list off a few honorable mentions before we call this an episode. I'd also love to know if you guys have any ideas on, maybe not ideas, but news stories and things about...
Do you have any ways we might smuggle drugs into the country? We promise not to use them for nefarious means. Send them to badideashow@gmail.com.
Yes, I'd love to hear your ideas, your news stories, and things about that. But here's a few honorable mentions before we go. Neil Lansing went above and beyond when he went to jail. Inside a single condom he stored in his rectum, he had 17 oxycodone pills, a cigarette, 6 matches, an empty syringe with an eraser over the needle, a lip balm container, another condom, a piece of flint, a paper coupon, and a CVS receipt.
You know, I'm actually on board with that lip balm.
It was an empty container, though.
Okay, I'm not on board anymore. I thought he was trying to get around the high prices at the prison commissary, Tony.
Yeah, like, that would have made more sense than an empty one. It's like, even if you use the container later, at least bring the lip balm.
Exactly, yeah.
In another bid to get drugs into prison, some enterprising people picked up a cantaloupe, filled it with pills on the inside, hoping that the guards wouldn't notice that the seeds were actually pills. Unfortunately, the guards noticed.
Prisoners are resourceful, man.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of times this stuff works just because those guys aren't getting paid enough to care sometimes. Or they're being
we
paid
wouldn't
off.
hear about them if they did work, right? Like, it's only the really bad failures that make the news.
Yeah, all the best ones are the ones that people don't know about, and I'm sure those are like magician trade secrets sometimes. You're not going to really reveal them to that many people. And this last one is, I know it might be hard to believe, but I found many, many instances of people in Florida trying to smuggle snakes onto a plane. And I don't know if they just haven't seen the movie, but it is not going to end well.
What? Why?
Because they were
Florida,
like moving.
Tony.
Because yeah, I know.
We don't have that many snakes where I am. Maybe it's a different part of Florida. It's a big state.
It's people moving. It's people wanting to sell ball pythons elsewhere. There was like a woman that had a snake stuffed into her bra and hoped nobody would notice. Just like all sorts of snakes on planes, and I don't get it. It's like you could just drive to the rest of the continental United States with a whole boatload of snakes in the back of your car. So why risk bringing a live animal on a plane like that? I did see that one of the weirder ones is lots of people will stuff cockatoos into like water bottles and try to get them because they sell for over $1,000 per bird. So there's a lot of weird animal smuggling that happens, but that's a different episode.
All right. Is that all you got then, Tony?
That's all the ones that I feel like could fit into one episode. We might end up revisiting some smuggling stuff later because some very, very entertaining things that are part of this world. But these are the quick, dirty drug smuggling ones.
All right, then. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you like this, don't forget to tell a friend about it. Subscribe to it on whatever podcast platform you prefer, or you can go over to YouTube, where we have our Bad Ideas YouTube channel, and subscribe over there. And if you have bad ideas you'd like us to cover, you can send them in to badideasshow@gmail.com.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.